You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and Jon Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.
Welcome to the Mammal Watching podcast with me, Jon Hall in New York.
And me, Charles Foley in Minneapolis. Jon, Happy New Year.
And a Happy New Year to you, Charles. How was your holidays?
Yeah, they seem like a fairly long time ago now, actually. Unfortunately, isn't that always the case?
Yeah.
But yes, no, they were good. Went up with the family up to northern Minnesota and saw some interesting Minnesotan wildlife, moose, wolves, American marten, and there's also an owl eruption at the moment happening in northern Minnesota and Sax-Zim Bog. So people come from all over the world to see gray owls, boreal owls, etc. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, we saw a couple of those as well.
Try and get over. Yeah, that sounds fun. Good.
Yeah. And how about yourself? I've seen some rather spectacular images of large cats coming from your Facebook feed.
Yeah, no, I had a really fun week in China, a very cold week, but a really fun week with Sid, the guide, and a group of friends. We saw some really nice mammals, but it's just a really fun group of people. And then I stopped in Thailand on the way home, and I was hoping to see a monkey or two, but I ended up seeing a ton of stuff that weekend, including a really great encounter with the black leopard, which I'm working on the trip report as we or almost as we speak, just before we speak and after we speak. I'll keep going with that one. So that was good. Didn't feel like Christmas, but it felt pretty good.
Yeah, fantastic. No, those videos of the black leopard were just ridiculously good.
Yeah,
it basically walked right past you. So well done.
Exactly, right place at the right time.
As always, Jon. As always.
Yeah, maybe. Let's get on with this month's podcast, and we thought we'd do something a little different this month. Ease ourselves into the new year gently. And Charles and I thought we'd have a chat about a trip we took at the end of last year to Ethiopia and Djibouti. That I think for me was my favorite trip of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a wonderful trip and a super area and one that I highly encourage people to go and visit. So we will talk people through the details.
Yeah, let's do it. It was unexpectedly good, wasn't it? And that's the thing.
It was.
The expectations were wildly surpassed. So the background to this was there were a couple of reports on Mammal Watching from pre-COVID of people going to look for Dibatag, primarily Dibatag in the Somali region of Ethiopia, and then adding on a trip into Somaliland to see Beira. So these are two really special antelope that are found only in the Horn of Africa. And these trips were run by a Swedish guy called Håkan. I hope I pronounced that right. It looks like it should be Hacken, but it's not. It's Håkan Polstrand. And so I was talking to him and you before COVID. We were talking about trying to get these trips happening. And of course, COVID happened. So finally, the visas were possible. And so we started planning this for the end of 2024. And originally, we were going to look for Dibatags in Ethiopia and then go over the border into Somaliland to look for Beira, where there's a reliable site for them. And we were pretty well advanced into this when I suddenly realized that Somaliland, for the purposes of the US government, is a part of Somalia still, which is a problem if you ever need to travel to the US on a tourist visa, because Somalia is one of I think the 5 countries they have asked if you've visited since 2011. And if you say yes, you will not get an ESTA. And you have to go to the embassy and make an appointment. And so you can get a visa, but it's all very troublesome. Not a problem for you. Now you're an American, Charles, but it would have been a problem for me as an Australian and a Brit. So we started talking, you and I, about other options. And I think it was you that figured out we could probably see the Beira in Djibouti. So we sort of split the trip into 2 modules. We do the first few days in Ethiopia with Håkan Polstrand organizing it all for us. And then we were going to return to Addis and then go to Djibouti, where you, Charles, were taking the lead and organizing that part of the trip.
Yeah. And, I think that it's probably fair to say that this was a trip that we'd been thinking about for about 10 years. Dibatags. So Dibatag looks like a slightly more slender and graceful gerenuk. So it's a medium to large size antelope with a very long neck and sort of silvery gray body. And it's a specialist of the Horn of Africa. So you only find it in Somalia and the Somali region of Ethiopia. And Beira, pretty much the same. It's a smaller antelope. It's like a big steenbok, but again, steenbok that's been sort of dipped in silver and it's got a black stripe and white underbelly. Just a gorgeous animal, and restricted mostly to Somaliland, perhaps a little bit of Somalia, and just eking an existence out on the very borders of Ethiopia and Djibouti. So, two species that any animal lover really would want to go and see. But of course, that part of the world is difficult. It's like when opportunities arise, you need to go for them because when we were first talking about it, it seemed fairly straightforward. And then, of course, there was a civil war in Ethiopia, and that put the kibosh on things for a while. And Ethiopia, yeah, it's still a little dodgy. People were asking us, is it safe? And ironically, most of Ethiopia is a bit of a no-go zone for tourists at the moment, except the Ethiopian Somali region, which used to be called the Ogaden, which is a bit ironic given that that's the area where in the past there was a lot of trouble. So it means that there are very few tourists coming into Ethiopia at the moment. And from a mammal watching perspective, it's a pain in the rump to get your binoculars into the country. You have to apply for two different permits from two different government ministries. And we only got the final permit, I think, a few days before we traveled. Smaller power binoculars, 8 powers are all right, but 10-power binoculars, they have an issue with. And all of us were asked about our binoculars at some stage on the trip. So that is something that you basically have to go with a reputable travel company to be able to organize that, because Ian Thompson, who we went with on this trip, in the past, he had his Swarovski binoculars confiscated at the airport and struggled to get them back on his way out. And I had another friend who was basically interrogated for 8 hours for having a pair of binoculars in her hand luggage. So it's something that you do have to consider. But anyway, the company set it up for us, and in the end, it wasn't a problem.
Yeah, no, it's completely ridiculous, to be honest, in my opinion. But yeah, Hoken was all that our guide was all the time very reassuring. He knew he'd get the permits. He really does know his stuff. But my permit arrived the morning I was flying, and then we were supposed to bring in a hard copy to the airport when it's obviously impossible when you're out of the country. But they don't. The good news is they don't seem to care about cameras anymore. That was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just binoculars they're looking for. But they look for them. They found my binoculars straight away. They just confiscated them, and I think they were kind of amazed when I said, "Well, I've got a permit." So then that caused a great deal of examination. They went to see the originals, and someone from outside the airport had to come in. So it's just a major pain. But at least cameras are no longer a problem, or not a problem at the moment. But yeah, there's no way you can kind of sneak a pair of binoculars in. They see them as a weapon of war.
Yeah, after your experience, I just went straight to goods to declare and just said, "Hey, I've got binoculars to declare. Can someone help me with this?" And they were fine with it. But that said, we decided that no one was going to try and get thermal images into the country because that would probably just be really asking for trouble. So unfortunately, we didn't have any images with us.
But other than that, I think that Ethiopia went like clockwork. I mean, partly because of Hacken and the local tour agency Magic Land, first class, and absolutely know their stuff. But also people were like super nice. And in the Somali region, like you said, flew to Jijiga Airport, and there was an American doctor in the car park, a white guy, and he sort of looked at us and his mouth dropped, and he said, "You're the first Caucasian tour group I've seen down here in 8 years." So it is off the beaten track, but just lovely people, felt super safe. Just a really, really special region to go to.
Yeah. The airport you fly into is Jijiga, and that's effectively where the tour starts. So Hakan flew in with us from Addis, but over there we were met by 2 vehicles. So 3 vehicles. He'd sent the 3 vehicles on in advance because it takes them 2 days just to drive out there. So there we were met by Brooke, who owns the travel company, and by Hassan, who is Mr. Dibatag. He's probably seen more Dibatags than anyone else on the planet, and has spent quite a number of years working on them or with them. And there was also a government man, another Hassan, who came with us. So it was about an 8-hour drive
Hmm.
to go down to the village where we were going to stay. You need to get a lot of permits to be able to actually get into this area. But Hakan had been running these trips, I think, since about 2017. So he had made all the connections he needed to in the local government offices, etc. So was able to get all the permits. And one of the vehicles always had to stop at some of these like main district villages as we were passing through to show the permits. But it really wasn't a terribly big deal.
No, but you couldn't do it on your own. It's not the sort of place where you think you can rent a car in Addis and drive down there. That wouldn't be advised. But yeah, because Hakan's an interesting guy. So he's Swedish, but he basically grew up in Addis. He has an Ethiopian wife. He speaks the language perfectly, and he spent a lot of his life in Ethiopia just exploring. He was a hunter for a while, but he just loves, I think, to travel and to take pictures, and he wants to see every corner of that huge country. So he's really doing this, I think, because he loves doing it. But he knows people. People know him and trust him, so
Mhm.
he can open these doors.
Yeah, he's a taxidermist by trade, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he's actually written a book on the wildlife of Ethiopia. I think it might even be the mammals of Ethiopia. Really great coffee table book. And I should say that Hakan's, I think, 72 years old.
Mm,
Incredible energy. He was always the first up every day,
yeah.
etc. So just a really, really good guide. And he set up a camp. So we drove to this village, I think it's called Gurudumi,
Mm,
and put up a camp under two great acacia trees, fairly close to the village on the other side of a lake. And as you'd expect, someone who's lived in the African bush for a long time, he knows exactly how to set up a good bush camp.
yeah. No, I was super impressed. I kind of was expected to be hot, dusty, and pretty uncomfortable, but the climate was. I mean, it was warmish during the day, but not unpleasant. And at night, it was cool. We were, in our sleeping bags, slept really well under the stars. The food was great. To have like showers and things was. I didn't expect any of this, so it was way more comfortable than I was expecting. I was really pleasantly surprised with that.
Yeah. And the local people, very friendly. So they are sort of ethnically Somali, and they speak Somali Muslims. They're all pastoralists. No cattle. I don't think we saw any cows at all. At least I didn't.
No, just goats and camels, I think.
Goats and camels.
Yeah.
So that's it. They have their goats. They have their camels. There are some small communities and some larger ones. And this area now, Jijiga, seems to be now being seen as a bit of a gateway into Somaliland. So I think that more and more people are moving into that area. But where we were was still fairly isolated. And the general idea was that every day in the morning, early in the morning, and again in the later afternoon, we would go out with a couple of the local guides and look for Dibbatag and just walk along, looking for tracks and hoping to see the animal. That was basically the name of the game over there.
Mm. Yeah, and so I mean, I can't remember when Hacken first saw them, but he spent a long time trying to figure out where to go and to meet the right people for how to see this. But he was convinced all along we were going to see Dibbatag. It was just a matter of when.
Hmm.
Um, but they were not as easy to see, I suppose, as I thought. As we'll hear, we'll talk about that. But they know the spots. They know exactly. There's two or three locations, right, where they've seen them in the past, and it was really focusing on those areas and trying to find which were being used at the moment by the animals. But Hassan, the Mr. Dibbatag, as he calls himself, he been down there like working with researchers. Was it for 6 months before they saw a single Dibbatag?
I
Was it
believe it
even
was
longer
one
than that?
year. I
One
believe it was
year.
a
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
So the story, if I remember it correctly, was that they were employed by a private zoo in the Middle East
Mhm.
called Al Wabra. And the rich sheikh who owned the zoo, he wanted to basically have a collection of all of the antelopes of Africa, and Dibbatag was high on his list. And so he sent some people out, including Hassan, to go out there and look for Dibatags in Ethiopia. And as you said, yeah, the first one took him 12 months to actually even see. And then gradually after that, they started figuring out, okay, which are the areas where you find them. But this is an animal which occurs in low densities, relatively shy, and occurs in really thick bush. So it's quite difficult to see. The biome that we were in is, if you look at sort of like African vegetation biomes, it's called the Somali Maasai biome. And the strange thing for me was that it's the same biome that I lived in Tanzania in Tarangire National Park. So the community areas outside Tarangire National Park look very, very similar to the habitat that we were in. I'd say about 60 to 70% of the vegetation species were the same with the birds, many of the same mammal species, etc. And this was fairly thick vegetation. A lot of the Acacia mellifera, the wait a bit thorn, which I seem to remember you got hung up on a
Waits
few
a lot
times,
for.
John.
Yeah.
And just yeah, if you looked out at it, you'd think, okay, that's a sort of Kenyan or Tanzanian Maasai land.
Yeah. So I mean, it was thick in that you couldn't see very far at any particular point, but there was always a trail. It wasn't like bashing through dense forest. It was sort of low bushes, trees a few meters high, I guess, very, very flat, a very sandy soil. And there were sort of open areas and then sort of more bushy areas. But there was always a way to walk through, but you could never see that far. So there was a lot of the local guys climbing up low trees and scanning because like I never tried to climb one, but I guess they could see a lot further from just climbing a few meters up.
Mm.
But these guys, the tracking, I was really interested in sort of getting into the tracking of these animals and the way they were reading the ground. And they were, as you said, Dibbatag, it's superficially like a gerenuk, and I guess their tracks must be fairly similar, but they were noticing the Dibbatag tracks and they were confident these were Dibbatag and how fresh they were. And it was just really interesting walking along, like looking more down than up, watching them read the soil. They were very skilled, those guys.
Yeah. The way it worked was that we were split up into two groups. And that's always a bit of a tricky one because
Yeah.
basically you effectively guarantee that one group is going to see the animal at least before the other and possibly sees it and the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
So I went off with Alex Meyer. So he was the fourth person on the trip, and you went with Ian Thompson. And each of us had a couple of guides. I think Hassan came with us the first day, and then he swapped out between the different groups. And you just walk around looking for these animals. And at the start, you go out thinking, we're going to get it. This is absolutely, we're going to nail it.
Yeah.
And then at the end, you're walking through this thick bush and say, how on earth are we ever going to see anything in this thick bush? But Alex and I, we were the ones who got lucky first. And we saw our first Dibbatag on the first afternoon. So we went out with a chap who we later called the Dibbatag Whisperer. I think his name was Musa. And he was really good at moving through the landscape, really quiet, really good eyes, but also he just knew how to communicate. He knew how to tell us, go slow, come quick, hang back, etc. Of course, this was all just sign language. He didn't speak any English. And we stopped at a location, walked for 2 minutes outside the car, and he spotted a Dibbatag. And he motioned, come, come, come. And then it moved. So then we ran forward a little bit and stopped. And I just got a vision, half a second, right, of an antelope moving through the dense vegetation. And I saw the neck, and you think, okay, is it a Dibbatag? Is it a Gerenuk? And then you see the body, it's silver. Wow, it's a Dibbatag. Just make out the tail, and then it disappears. And then your brain is trying to reprocess that sighting. It's like just all the identification features. Are you sure? And then it becomes a case of, okay, I've seen it for half a second. We've come thousands of miles. Is half a second good enough to have actually seen this animal, etc.? All these things that just go through your mind when you're mammal watching. Unfortunately, this Dibbatag was fairly relaxed and then stopped and looked back at us for about a minute. And it was a female. We were able to get some great photographs of it. And yeah, as we said before, it looked very much like Geranox, just the facial structure, everything. But it's mostly that silver back, and also the way they move. They often run with the tail up high, and they have
Yeah.
a prancing run.
But
So
Dibatag means, was it that Dibatag means something like lift erect tail or lifted tail in Somali? That's where the word comes from. I think that's what Hakan
right,
said, and they really do
right,
look so different. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then we saw, I guess, another male. I think the next day or the day after. Um, and you guys, you struggled a little bit with that one, didn't you? You were
No, we did. Don't I
every day coming
remember?
back,
Yeah.
and it's like, no, not yet, not yet.
Yeah, it was all very well you seeing it on the first afternoon, and I thought, well, we get to that site, we'll get it tomorrow. But the whole of the next day, we didn't see it. Jaren fooled me a couple of times, but we saw one not very well. We got the like prolonged views of the back half of one, I think, on the third morning. But no, I mean, photographs just of the tail and the butt. Didn't really get a good look. And for us, it really wasn't until that last morning when we all went together where we got a really lovely look. My photos were hopeless, but we saw several animals at different points during that morning. I don't really know how many we saw overall, but probably two or three. We kept kind of bumping into them, getting fleeting looks. But the one view I will remember is watching one trot just through a clearing for a couple of seconds. But it was so graceful. It was like a kind of like a dressage pony. It was just running so erect with its head up and its tail sticking straight up and lifting, flicking its hooves back, and it was like a unicorn. It was absolutely beautiful, and that's the sighting I remember. I wish I got some video of it, but it's in my mind forever. Yeah, beautiful,
Mm.
beautiful animal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I believe they are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN site, and on the red data list, there's a thumbsuck estimate for the
Mhm.
population, which is about 2,000. But I'm sure nobody knows because the only areas that they occur are in mainland Somalia. They're not in Somaliland,
Mhm.
and in the Ogaden part of Ethiopia. And on the Ethiopian part, there's an area Hakan sort of drew on the map, which was maybe sort of 300 kilometers by perhaps 50 to 80 kilometers wide,
Yeah,
where they might occur.
yeah.
And there's some people from David Mallon, for instance, from the Antelope Specialist Group, I believe is going out later this year to go and look at some of those other sites. But basically, no one really knows. Are they contiguous throughout that entire area, or are they just small, isolated populations, etc.? And then the news out of Somalia isn't great. So a friend of mine who was a vet had actually gone into Somalia in the early 2000s, and he did see Dibatags over there. And he said that they were most commonly seen on the sort of boundaries between clans because those were sort of no man's land where people
All
wouldn't
right.
wouldn't go in and hunt.
Yeah,
But a lot has changed in Somalia since then. There are a lot of guns in that area,
yeah.
and Hakan has some contacts over there, and they say that they have not seen any Dibatags recently in areas where they used to.
Mm.
So, so who knows? The population could actually be very small. But what was interesting is that nobody in that area carried any guns. So you compare it to the Afar and the Danakil, etc. There, every herdsman you see has an AK-47.
Mm.
And over here, I don't recall seeing a single weapon.
No.
And Hakan says that in all the times they've been walking through the bush, they've never found a snare.
Mm.
And indeed, that is reflected in the sort of behavior and also the density of the wildlife that you're seeing.
Yeah.
So they don't seem to be hunting the Dibbatag, certainly not in that area, and they're not hunting any of the small Dik-dik or anything else. And my guess is that the Dibatags should do all right. The problem being population growth and habitat
Yeah,
loss.
yeah, exactly.
So big roads were starting to come into that area, and if that happens, more and more people move in, and then the Dibbatag habitat will get more and more restricted and cut up. So that is the problem. But for the time being, I'd say the species is probably doing okay in that part of Ethiopia at least.
Yeah, no, we were seeing livestock, camels and goats every day, like where we were seeing the Dibbatag, and I think Hokum was saying there's more and more people and more livestock in these areas, so there's obviously competing for the resources with the antelope. So yeah, but no, it was extraordinary. I mean, the number of Dik-diks we saw. Do you remember that night drive we started counting, and we how many did we see over 10 kilometers?
We saw, I think, over 100 dik-dik
Yeah,
over a span of about 7 or 8 kilometers.
yeah,
And that's just along the road.
yeah,
So
incredible.
if that density is the same in this areas of bushland off the road, you are talking about an area with hundreds of thousands, if not low millions of dik-dik.
Mm,
So they were just ubiquitous.
yeah.
And what was interesting, of course, in that area was that there are 3 species of dik-dik. And as far as I know, it's the only place in Africa which does actually have 3 species. One of them is the Gunter's dik-dik. That's the one with the big snout. And then the salt dik-dik. And this is the Hara subspecies, which is a beautiful reddish color on the sides. But the one that we really wanted to see was the silver dik-dik. And that species, until very recently, was only known from Somalia proper. So a small stretch of land along the coast in Somalia. And then I believe it was in the early 2000s when it was reported from that part of the Ogaden in Ethiopia. And what was really strange about that species was that its localized distribution within that area was absolutely tiny, wasn't it?
Yeah, and predictable. Yeah,
And predictable. We would drive along, and Håkon would say, "Okay, silver dik-dik start here," and you start seeing silver dik-dik, and then a few kilometers along, he'll say, "Okay, and they stop here," and indeed, you wouldn't see any
yeah,
after that.
yeah,
So you're talking of an area of a few tens of square kilometers, perhaps, and the habitat looked identical to the
that's
adjacent
right. I
habitat.
couldn't see any difference. Yeah,
Not
yeah,
not at all. So
yeah,
how do they disperse? How do they move?
yeah,
What dictates where they live? And then you'd get all 3 species sometimes in view in one go.
yeah,
So and these are 3 antelope, which are pretty much identical in size. So how do they partition their niche?
yeah.
Yeah,
That was very interesting.
lots of interesting questions about that species.
Yeah, and they're very. I think Alex was saying there were no iNaturalist pictures of silver dik-dik, so he was excited to be posting the first pictures to get his iNaturalist badge. But yeah, it's another very rare little known species. So what else do we see? I'm trying to think. We saw another good species there is Speaks pectinator, which is a fancy word for Gundy. Little kind of Hyraxy like rodenty sort of thing that lives in small rock piles, but these are not living on cliff faces, just tiny little piles of boulders. We saw those several times. They're kind of interesting. Rufus elephant shrew was another one, and Hoken's got spots for all of these, and they're all so reliable. Like he knows exactly where to look for these. And we thought for a while that maybe the Rufus elephant shrew was the Somali elephant shrew, and we had to get good pictures of the tuft at the end of the tail or the lack of it. And we got those. And it was a Rufus. We saw, what did we see? We saw Genet a couple of times, common Genet.
Desert warthog.
Desert warthogs, yeah, they were cool.
And then one that you had already seen, but the rest of us hadn't, was the naked mole rats.
Yes, yeah,
And they were really cool. They had their underground burrows very close to the camp,
yeah,
so right by the village. And we would sort of walk up to them and just stand there, during the day. And eventually one of them would start digging, and you'd see dirt coming up from out of the burrow.
yeah,
And if you waited long enough, then you could get close and you could actually see its little hindquarters coming out the hole. And one
yeah,
occasion, I saw the head as well.
yeah.
So that was very cool.
It was, that was surprising for me because most of the gophers and all those kind of fossorial rodent things, they're mainly active when it's cooler, so you tend to see them more early in the morning, late in the evening. But the naked mole rats, it was in the middle of the day when they started sort of going at it with their excavations, and it was quite predictable. And it wasn't just there was a colony right by camp. And I sort of wandered over there in the early morning, couldn't see anything. Went back there at midday, and there were like 7 or 8 of the workers active at the same time with all these plumes of dirt, little volcanoes of dirt flying into the air, and it was difficult to know which one to look like, which one to sneak up to and try and peek down the hole. But yeah, middle of the day, I thought that was very strange.
Yeah, and super animals, as I said,
Yeah.
I'd never seen them. I'm not even sure they occur in Tanzania. There is one record, but is it perhaps a bit dubious?
Yeah.
So wonderful to actually finally clap eyes on them.
And even more wonderful for me to discover they've just been split. There's now 3 species of naked mole rat. So the
Mm,
ones we saw are not the same as the ones in Kenya, if I understand the map correctly. So
right.
it was a life for me too when I got home. Yeah.
Right.
We saw bush babies, the Senegal Galago or the Northern
Northern Senegal.
Galago, which we
Yeah.
thought for a while was Somali. What else did
Right.
we see? Hot-nosed bats.
Wildcat,
Yeah.
Gerenuk, we saw, and we missed lesser kudu. It's one of the other
Right.
antelopes that you might have been able to see in the area. There were cheetah tracks, and striped
Mm.
hyenas had been seen, and
Mm.
we saw golden wolves, etc. So a lot of the northern savanna mammals are, you find in that area as well, which is great.
So I guess we saw what about 20 species of mammals probably
Mhm.
for those 6 or 7 days, which was really great.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic, and it's really worth going out with Hakon. The Dibbatag for me certainly is a species which I really wanted to see, and I'm very, very glad that I went. And beyond that, it's simply the fact that the more people who go out over there, the more money is coming into that local community, and they're starting to take more and more pride in the Dibatags because these like weird people come and camp over there and go
Mm.
around looking for them. And one of the things that we discussed with Hakan is that what we're going to do is get some football shirts printed up for the local Gurudumi football team and send them over. And these shirts will have a Dibatag picture on them, and then in Somali writing, either Dibatag or Save Dibatags. So we are working on getting those together, and we'll hopefully send those out a bit later this year.
Yeah, the idea went down very well with all the locals when we talked about it. So that'll be fun. So hopefully there'll be a couple of Premier League players who come from Gadumi in a few years, and they'll be talking about Dibatags on the TV. From Gadumi, we drove back to Jijiga and then flew up to Addis and on to Djibouti for the last few days of our trip. And what was a rather different kind of set of arrangements in Djibouti because we did it on the cheap. Do you want to talk a bit about how the sort of process of trying to find someone to take us around Djibouti, which wasn't easy, I know.
Yeah, well, first of all, very few people have actually sort of done trips around Djibouti. So we asked around, and there was one tour operator who operated mainly into Somaliland, who was highly recommended. So people said they were very good. And indeed, if we were going to do Somaliland, I would definitely have gone with them. We contacted them, and they seemed very professional, etc.
Yeah.
But the prices were a little bit on the high side. Nothing exorbitant, but I got into my head that we could probably do it for a little cheaper.
Yeah.
And so so I decided to look for a local operator in Djibouti who I found on online. And anyway, this guy was able to organize our permits for us for the visas, and then set up a vehicle and sort of booked the accommodation. But I guess the moral of the story here is that you get what you pay for. And we, I think we had basically said, okay, there are three important elements over here that need to be taken care of. The first is we would like to be met at the airport.
Okay.
The second is we would like for all of the food shopping to have been done in advance so we don't waste any time in Djibouti City. And third, most importantly, neither John and I eat any fish. So we didn't want anything to do with fish on this trip. John, do you want to take it from there?
This is just a priceless moment. I love this story. So we get to the airport at 6 o'clock. Djibouti, my US cell service isn't working. No one's cell service is working. It's one of those countries where it's all blocked. There's no sign of Hassan, our guide. So we're wondering what to do. And I think, Charles, you managed to talk to a driver for one of the hotels who actually had a cell phone that worked, and we called him, and he's coming. So like 6:30, we've been there half an hour. It's now dark. This guy comes kind of swaggering up the path towards us, walking a bit like Popeye with a grin on his face. And he's like, hi, brothers, sort of high fives. And they're like, well, where have you been? You're late. Like straight away, we were off to a bad start with him. And I wasn't late. I was in the car park organizing the car. Well, that's still late. But then he managed, so that's first, the first one of the cardinal 3 rules was broken. But I swear the next 2 sentences were, right, now we have to go into the city to finish buying the food. And after that, I'm taking you to a seafood restaurant. No one has failed so spectacularly in the first minute of meeting someone. So, oh my, I'm so glad he didn't come with us. I really am. I mean, he did the job. And we had a wonderful driver. I just was like one of the nicest people. We had a great cook. We had a fantastic guide that you'd found. We'll talk about him in a second, a local biologist. But yeah, Hassan, it wasn't a good start. We were just seething. I remember when he said about the seafood restaurant, you just turned on him.
Well, but then he took us to the seafood restaurant, and we walk in, and this guy goes to the freezer and pulls out this whacking great fish and starts waving it in the air, says, you want fish, you want fish. And John, you may or may not have said, let's just go to the Sheraton Hotel and spend the night over there.
That was the same restaurant. I was in a bad mood at this. I was just kind of sulking at this point. And what I wanted to eat, I just wanted like a little bit of lamb or something, just very, very simple. And they gave me a chunk of chicken, which they swore was lamb. And I kept saying, it's chicken. It's obviously, no, it's lamb. And yeah, it was, I'm very glad we left that city as soon as we did.
But as you say, he actually organized things really well and was able to adjust to things on the fly. The vehicle was brand new. Driver was great. Had a great cook. But the person who really made this the trip was a newly minted PhD called Matteo Mahmoud Issa. He's half Djiboutian, half French. And as I said, he had just finished his PhD at a university in Poland. He had studied bird behavior in Djibouti. And he was a super nice guy, knew a lot about the wildlife of the area, and is currently working for a small local NGO called the Deccan Foundation. And it's a small French-run NGO, and they manage several areas within Djibouti. And in a couple of these areas, they have set up camps. And Matteo is now working as a sort of part-time researcher with them, but he also works, I think, helps with logistics. And he offered to take us around, which was absolutely fabulous. And the key target, as we said earlier, for Djibouti was the beira. But we had another few animals that we had in mind. One was the crested rat, which, John, you, of course, have seen in Kenya. And then there's Summering's gazelle and Dorcas gazelle. And there was also Abyssinian Genet, which was a real long shot, a species that had only been seen for 4 or 5 times in the last 60 years. Matteo was able to guide us on that. And so what we did was the first night we actually drove out of Djibouti city to one of their camps called Jalelo, where we were hoping to see Rupel's fox. And then the next day we were going to drive to the place for the beira called Asamo and spend either one night or, if we needed to, 2 nights over there, and then drive to another part of Djibouti in the Forêt de Dey. And this is a sort of semi-protected area where we would hope to be able to find the main rat and possibly the Ethiopian genet. So that was the general idea. And what I should say about Djibouti, because very few people have been to Djibouti, and Djibouti seems to serve 2 main purposes. So first of all, it is the main port for goods entering and exiting Ethiopia. So there is a main road going from Djibouti city into Ethiopia, and this road has thousands and thousands of trucks simply going backwards and forwards, taking fuel and goods. And you'd think, okay, well, if that's the case, why hasn't Ethiopia at some point just annexed Djibouti? And perhaps the reason why it hasn't is because Djibouti also serves as the world's largest military base. So it has military bases from the US, from China, France, UK, and they get very few tourists per se, but there are lots of expatriates over there, most of whom are linked with the military. And it wasn't uncommon to be sort of driving along and suddenly seeing these Westerners in full military equipment with enormous weapons walking along the side of the road, and no one was paying them any attention at all. So rather bizarre.
Now, again, it was a country that my expectations were partially formed, but I was really surprised both by the city. I mean, there was big fancy malls in the city, like Western malls, but also the two camps the first two camps we stayed at, the Deccan camps, one of them I think was not officially open because it suffered some damage and weather damage, but they were beautiful, absolutely gorgeous spots. Like it's such a scenic country. Asamo, the place where the bearer are, you said it looks like Hemis in Ladakh. It really did. There's these big mountains, rocky, stunning scenery, the kind of riverbeds running through it. And it was really, the landscape there is really pretty. And I wasn't expecting that at all.
Yeah, me neither. So it was the second day when we drove to Asamo, and we got there in the afternoon. And what I should say about Djibouti is that the roads generally are really good. They're really good tarmac road. And then as soon as you go off out into the boonies, the roads effectively just disappear.
Yeah.
And the country is very rocky. There's a lot of lava around. And so on the trip into Asamo, we were first of all going up basically just roads made of boulders. And then ultimately ended up just driving up the main riverbed. But the driver was great, the car was great. We got there no problem. And as you said, we got to the camp, and it was just gorgeous, lovely area, nobody around. And well, we got there about mid-afternoon, and then went for a walk. And Matteo, who is young and fit, pointed to the nearest mountain and said, "Oh, we'll walk to the top of that mountain." And we all kind of looked at each other and said, he didn't really mean that we'd walk to the top of the mountain, did he?
20 minutes, what we said it would take. Yeah.
Anyway, top of the mountain it was. So, and this area is right on the border between Ethiopia and Somaliland. And in fact, you could see a base, which basically is a base for all three armies over there. So you don't want to be walking through that area by yourself, because you could very easily end up on the wrong side of a border. But we started walking up this mountain, and after about 45 minutes, there we saw three bearer about a few hundred meters away.
Yeah, they were close. I mean, you spotted them again. You were really on fire this trip with spotting stuff, but they were much closer than I imagined we'd get to them. I thought we were going to see these distant antelope, but they were on a ridge, silhouetted, and then Mattia kind of led us around the path, and we were right on top of them at one point. They were probably only 100 meters away. So it was a really nice look at them. Yeah. And took us 45 minutes when we arrived to find them.
Right.
Was, even Mattia was surprised at that. He was pretty confident we'd find them in a day, but to get them so quickly. Yeah.
And then coming back in the camp, we saw a couple of species of mice, some acamis, and one which I'm still convinced I saw a moose. But anyway, we won't resurrect that particular thread. Muscate, and went out at night for a quick walk. You saw a Ruppel's fox. It was just a great area. Highly recommend it. And we wish we had actually spent a couple of days over there. It was beautiful. That would have been great.
The only blemish on that evening I remember was our poor cook, who was a lovely woman who made us a huge feast of a dinner. But she'd filled it with fish because, guess what? Hassan hadn't told us we didn't eat, you and I didn't eat fish. So she had to, I don't know what happened, but she was very disappointed. Very annoyed, like very concerned. I think we were going to blame her, and she kept mentioning it was Hassan hadn't told us. That was unfortunate. But yeah, other than that, perfect.
And then the next morning, we looked around for Somali Sengi. So
Yeah.
the Somali Sengi had only been rediscovered about 10 years previously, and they had thought to be extinct for many years. But we didn't find it there. But we decided that we would move anyway and go to the forest today and a camp called Ditilu. John, do you want to take the first bash at
Yeah, no,
describing Ditilu?
Ditilu was the polar opposite of the other two places we've been. So the last two places were remote and beautiful and empty. Ditilu, it it reminded me of a sort of a low budget horror film when there's generally a hillbilly family of cannibals have a sort of camp out in the middle of nowhere, building ramshackle buildings. There was trash scattered liberally all over the place. And the main dining areas are inside cages, which was to stop the monkeys from coming in. But you're sitting in a cage looking out, and it really felt like, last month there was a couple of backpackers tied up in here. We're going to be cut up with a chainsaw later. It was a disturbing place, but also it was so popular that we had to share rooms because the place was booked up mainly with French soldiers coming in with their family for the weekend. It's a popular weekend spot from Djibouti, which probably tells you as much as you need to know about Djibouti city. But yeah, just not a pleasant place at all.
No.
There was trash. It was on the edge of a kind of little creek, but that was just scattered with trash, which they decided to burn on our second day, which we thought was the end of chances for seeing anything. So yeah, just a very odd camp.
Yeah, really. And there was a kid who was just wailing nonstop.
Oh, that's right.
And then there was goats. The goat that we were going to eat that night was just bleating. And then there were cats all over the place.
Cats everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, here's this like renowned place that birders come to look for the sort of critically endangered Djibouti francolin, and there's cats everywhere. So we were sitting there in the cage trying to sort of keep the damn monkeys out, thinking, now we've got 2 nights over here to what we've done. And it turned out to be the best lodge I've ever stayed at for mammal viewing, probably because it was so damn filthy.
Yeah, my spirits that evening, I was like, we're never going to see anything here. And that, you're right, there was one of the staff's children was just, and apparently it's always wailing like this. That's what was it Lubac was saying, the driver, but just screaming for hours, and cats and garbage and noisy people. And I thought, we're never going to see anything. But how wrong I was.
How wrong indeed. So basically, we were just given free rein. You could just walk around, go out at night, see what you want to see. And the mammals that we wanted to see were the crested rat. And this is an animal which, John, you've seen in Kenya, and it's a large rat which chews up a bark and daubs poison onto its fur. And it advertises the fact that it's poisonous by lifting up its fur on its sides, and it's got this gorgeous browns and whites and blacks on the sides. So a wonderful, wonderful animal. So that was one species. And the other one was the Abyssinian Genet. Now, that was always going to be a real long shot. So they've only been a handful of records of this species in the last 60 years. But the thing is that, of course, not much research has been done in those areas. And the Deccan Foundation, who Matteo had been working for, they had put up some camera traps, and they say that they had got some video of Abyssinian Genet from around that area. So we had some hope. And the first night we went out, and right away, as soon as it got dark, we started seeing things. Some white-tailed mongooses were coming into camp. And then someone said, there's a maned rat on the other side of camp. So we wandered over there to look for the maned rat, couldn't find it, came back. And then we saw a genet, and we were looking at the genet, and we weren't quite sure what it was. And then someone said, there's another maned rat. Yeah. And then we just took off sprinting. Matteo, of course, he was the fittest. Like, we're in the front, and Alex the next fittest, and me about a mile behind. But
I didn't even bother. I stayed with the genet. So.
So got there, and the thing about these maned rats is that because they're poisonous, they really don't care too much about people. So it was just bumbling around, and these guys that spotted it in an area. So this was juvenile. We watched it for a little bit, and then it went off, and then we sort of made our way back. And by that time, the genet had sort of disappeared, and so we stayed up that night behind the kitchen amongst all the trash, and we had these most fantastic sightings of the main rat coming in, interacting with the white-tailed mongooses and the local cat, and it was literally 10 feet away, fur fully up, and you got some absolutely astonishing photographs of it. Just an amazing night.
Yeah, beautiful animal. It's just posing it like that for us. But the mongooses all the time coming in. We saw genets again a couple of times. There was Ian saw a zorilla at one point. Did he? I think he saw klipspringers too. Someone did.
Yeah.
All in the little stretch of sort of patch of bush forest just on the other side of the camp, on the sort of hillside.
Right.
But not more than a couple of 100 meters up and down. We would have traveled along there looking.
Yeah. And the genet that was around, it was pretty shy, difficult to see. You'd see the tail, you see, a little bit of the head, etc. And then all of a sudden, I got a full-on side view of the body, and this thing had broad black stripes all the way down its back, which is the definitive characteristic of the Abyssinian genet. So we'd seen it, but it just vanished. So then the next day we said, okay, that was really going to be our target, because no one has ever taken photographs of this species in the wild. Right, certainly no handheld photographs. There was one that was captured over there, I think 2006, and it was taken as a museum specimen.
Yeah, so dead pictures on the internet, but nothing I could find.
Yeah. So the next day, we went out in the evening and just started walking in the close proximity to camp, figuring that they would be coming into the food. And indeed, I think probably within maybe an hour, it's probably about, I don't know, 8, 9 o'clock, we saw a genet. And one of the local guides over there said that, he would see the Ethiopian genets, and he said they were a lot shyer than the common genet. He said they just skulk around. That was indeed the case. We kind of surround this animal, and we sort of followed it for about 20 minutes, just getting little glimpses, and finally it moved out into the open. And then we're able to see it fully on broadside. You can see the beautiful stripes, small genet. We all got some great photos of it.
Yeah.
And, the first ever pictures in the wild of this species.
I think Ian and Alex saw a common genet as well that evening, and they got pictures. And when you look at the pictures side by side, it was very, very obvious how different these two animals were. Different color, different everything. Yeah. Really, really special thing to see.
Yeah, and these are distinct stripes that the Ethiopian genet has. It's got basically the back crest, and then 2 broad stripes down most of its back. At least this individual did. I think that there's variation in how much stripes versus spots they have, but this one was very, very definitely on the stripe side. So that was amazing. That was the mammal of the trip, which is quite amazing when you think that we've been seeing Dibatags and bearers and crested rats, etc. And relatively easy to see.
Relatively easy. I mean, Djibouti, especially for people in Europe, it's we did all this in 3-4 nights. It's it's a long weekend. It could be a long weekend from Europe. It's not far from Europe. It's not expensive. You can camp. It's well set up with the driver knows the sites now. We did. Machio was great. We didn't. You could go without him. I mean, he's busy doing other things. You don't need a guide necessarily to see this stuff. The bear is probably where he's most important. But I think again, you'd find it on your own with some help, because there was a local guy at that camp who would have shown his bearer. So it's a very an undervisited destination that I think could become really popular next year, given how much cool stuff there is to see. It's a really special place. Yeah. We also got Somali Sengi, didn't we? In Ditalu, there's a little abandoned village about 45 minutes away from the camp where we saw several animals, including one that just sat on a rock for half an hour, and got some stunning pictures of that. That was an animal that was lost for 50 years. We got the famous Djibouti francolin. I don't know why people bother personally, but we did. We went to look for fruit bats. We didn't find the bats, but we saw the francolin. So that's,
Yeah, it was a
apparently that's a
bycatch,
good one.
wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And bush hyrax. Yeah, so Djibouti was a major surprise. Really was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you say, very easy. I mean, if you can hire Matteo, I would definitely do it. But the problem is, he's got a PhD, and I doubt whether he's going to be guiding for very long before he gets snapped up by some big organization. As you say, the driver knows the areas, and if Matteo's around, definitely go through him. And otherwise, some of the other local guides know where the animals are, and they're there. You just need to spend the time out at night looking for them. I think if we had been able to bring our thermals, we'd probably have seen
what we'd have found.
even more, probably more on the rodent front. But I think we were just extremely happy with what we saw, and it was certainly one of my top highlight trips.
Yeah, no, I loved it too. Largely, a lot of the success was thanks to you, Charles. You've been very modest, but you found the Genet, you found the Beira, you were the first to see the Dibatags, you were on fire. So that's great.
It's not often that, yes, I get to compete with you, John, on the
I never spot anything. I just have my
mistakes.
hat. I just get things pointed out to me. But that's fine.
And people, if you're interested in African wildlife, it's definitely a trip to do. It's, as you say, relatively straightforward, and no reason not to.
Yeah, no, exactly. Chip reports for both Ethiopia and Djibouti are imminent. They may already be out by the time you listen to this. There'll be details of how to contact the various guides, drivers, companies in those. But Happy New Year to you all. It's great talking to you, Charles, catching up, reliving those memories from that epic trip at the end of last year. And see you soon.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm off for a fish dinner.
Give Hassan my regards.
You've been listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and Jon Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.